What's up, guys? Happy Monday. It is finally time to talk a little ACC 2024 football schedule. I know we're a little late here getting this out. We have a lot going on, but nevertheless, wanted to get this out to you guys. And we have a star-studded show. My man, David Hale, is joining the program. Really excited to have him here with us. He brings so much insight, just not only to the ACC, but in all college football. But we got him dialed in, and it was super fun this episode. We're going back and forth. We're talking about favorite schedules, easier schedules, maybe manageable is the word that we want to use there, but favorable for sure. Who can run the table, some teams that might make some noise. Virginia Tech fans, I'm looking at you. I've been saying it. David's on the train with me. Really excited for you guys to hear what he has to say about that. Of course, jump into the Clemson Tigers. What do they need to do to get back? How does that schedule look like for them? The Noles, we talk about that. Miami, a lot of excitement from everybody. What is FSU going to look like with DJU? What is Miami going to look like with Cam Ward? And what do those schedules look like? Listen, we're going coast to coast, baby. 17 teams in the ACC. The Atlantic Coast Conference, I think we need to change that. We can keep the letters the same, but we need to go to the All Coast Conference because that's exactly what we are. Hey, real quick, before we get into this interview, this conversation with David Hale, a quick message from our friends over at the Ingles, then let's dive into these schedules. We had a lot of fun with this.
Did you know that Ingles sells more organics than any other store? Or that they run their own dairy? Or that they only serve USDA choice and prime meat? Did you know that they have more local craft beer than any place else? Or that they have Energy Smart stores? Or that they professionally slice and package imported cheese from Europe? Did you know about their giant international aisle, local farm partnerships, curbside pickup, wine department? Or that they donate 3,956 meals a day to local food banks? Well, now you do. It's all in the bag. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
David Hale, my man, welcome into the podcast. We really appreciate you joining us today. We're talking a little schedule talk on the show today, and we had to bring the expert on the ACC. So appreciate you joining us. Appreciate you coming in here. I know you have tons of thoughts on all of this.
I appreciate you loosely using the term expert. So
come on, you're wearing glasses. Look at you. It's what you got. That's when I wear mine when I want to be an expert.
Before we talk football schedules, I need to add. I want your opinion. When does grilling season officially begin? What is the first day of grilling season?
Hey, brother. Here's the deal. It never stops. Okay. All right. We're 365. Right. We're 365. I'm glad you asked this. This is a great opportunity for me to give love to Ingles. So
Perfect.
Thank you. I did my shopping. I got some just sick chicken breasts, man, and we racked up like 8 of those things on the Traeger. And then this Thursday, I'm going to be doing some reverse sear ribeyes for my brother-in-law. So I'm super excited about it. So grilling season does not ever stop. And honestly, I wish that I lived in an environment that wasn't hot as hell all the time. And I could have like some cold, snowy, epic grill shots, but I just don't have that. I just don't get that opportunity.
Well, maybe you could do a road show from Syracuse or something.
Yeah, that sounds really fun. Yes.
Yeah.
I can see Mac now just like in the kitchen at Dinosaur Barbecue learning some of the trade secrets there.
Yes.
That would be
That's
awesome.
a great idea. That's not a bad idea. We need to make that happen. I need to call up Coach Brown and make it happen. But anyway, David, appreciate you joining us, man. We're jumping all up in this thing, talking all these schedules. We got 17 teams.
Come
My
on.
goodness.
Look at this.
A lot of prep. We're going to the West Coast. Yeah, KG's color coordinated.
So many
She's doing
schedules,
great.
though. Man.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. So really, just first thing, David, I know that, again, 17 schedules, a lot of games. Big picture, was there anything that you saw that caught your eye, that was interesting, the modeling, any of that where you're like, man, that's cool, I like that?
I went through a little bit and just kind of – because I think, one of the things that you get with the ACC is a pretty evenly balanced conference by and large. I think there are a couple of teams that I have my doubts that they're going to be great. And then obviously you look at teams like Clemson and Florida State that recruit at such a high level that I think those are tough wins, even if those teams are not necessarily playoff teams year in and year out. I think those are tough wins. So you start kind of going through – like I went through and used Mark Schlabach's way too early top 25 and just said, like, how many top 25 teams is on each schedule? And it's incredibly balanced. Like, every single team except for one has between 2 and 4 of those teams. The vast majority have 3 or 4 of those teams on their schedule. There's one, and I'll leave this as a little bit of a I don't know, what do they call this in the TV business or podcast business? A little bit
tease,
of a surprise,
little
a little tease. Yeah, as we get to the toughest schedule. There's one that has 6, And but I think what this to me, and I think this is maybe one of the advantages of the 12-team playoff, though I tend to think every time we change something in college football, what I think is going to be an advantage actually turns into a gigantic nightmare and headache. But I think the ACC has fallen into a little bit of a trap the last couple of years. It was the same trap the Pac-12 was in for a long time, which is you have too many pretty good teams and no genuinely elite great team. Sorry, Florida State last year. You certainly should have been in that conversation. But I think that could be the case again this year. And by expanding to 12, I think that helps because you can't leave them all out now.
Right.
And I think there's a good chance that we end up with a handful of 9-3, 10-2 type teams, which should give them a conversation for more than one bid. Now, I'm very concerned that we are going to be just beating our heads against the wall talking about strength of schedule by the end of the year this year, and I'm not looking forward to that at all. But there is a window, I think, for the ACC to say, look, we've got a handful of teams that are playoff caliber now.
Right. And I think the point about that, KG, is there's really good out-of-conference games, right? And if you take care of business in those, okay, you feel a little bit better, and maybe you can get rolling, Kelly.
Yeah, why don't we start with some of those, David? Well, we start with Georgia Tech, Florida State in Ireland, which is crazy.
How are we getting there? Can we do...
Right, exactly. I've got a boat.
Yes. A boat? I'm going to take a plane. But okay, I said we're going to get to non-conference, but I just want to ask David, because you know everything, okay? Why is this game being played in Ireland?
I think a few different reasons.
Okay.
One, if you have the chance to drink with the delegation from Dublin that came over to the States to sell this game, you don't say no to that. Andrea and I, and this was completely happenstance, though I'm sure anyone who knows me might think that I planned this in advance, but Andrea and I were in Tallahassee when the Irish delegation came over for the big announcement of this game. And I will tell you that I did not feel great the next day. So God bless them. They're wonderful people. Look, this is Florida State views itself as a program that is a national program, but also in some ways an international program as they're trying to build the game more internationally and brand the game more internationally. And Florida State wants to be viewed as a program that is in the same conversation as Ohio State and Notre Dame and Alabama, that is just a brand name that you don't have to be a college football fan. You can live in a place like Ireland and know what Florida State's all about. So this is a bit of an opportunity for them to do that too. And of course, for Georgia Tech, it's a great opportunity to, play a marquee game in a week in which there's not a whole lot of them. So it's branding. It's, recruits see stuff like this. It's fun for the players. I don't know how much of a business trip versus a fun trip it's going to be, but it'll be a little of both. And I know Mike Norvell's talked about, the cultural implications of this. Hey, it's cool to be able to take our players and let them see something different, because a lot of these guys, I remember talking to Michael Alford. I won't remember the exact number, but I want to say it was something in the neighborhood of like 60 to 70% of the guys didn't own a passport before they scheduled this game. So
that's fantastic.
It's a good opportunity for growth for the players too.
Yeah, and we talk about, career development and outside development. Hey, we're getting people passports, okay, in college football. That's what we do. We're taking care of them. Quick one on that, and I'll let KG follow up here. But did anybody give you any insight? Have you had any conversations? When are they going? Like, are we there for a week, getting acclimated?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Man, I had some of this information, and my brain does not retain details for very long anymore.
Hey, you can't blame CTE, bro. Like, come on.
Only Matt could do that.
I blame 2 children under the age of 7 is what I blame, which has a very similar effect. If I recall correctly, they're going like 5 to 6 days early, and then I think they're going to have like an acclimation day afterwards before coming back. And then as the schedule sets up, they will play Boston College the next week, but that comes on a Sunday, so it kind of balances itself out. So they'll still be on a full week of rest with the acclimation day coming back from Ireland, which, if I'm also recalling correctly, is 5 hours ahead of us. So there is a little bit of jet lag on the return trip.
Yeah. David, are you taking an acclimation day in Ireland too?
Listen, I feel like you need there's several places locally or within domestically that I think require a maximum of 72-hour trip. So, and then a full acclimation day afterwards. So Vegas, New Orleans, those, you got to plan for that. And then I think Dublin falls into that same category. You
And
shouldn't spend
I
more
think
than
you're going
3
to
days
find
there.
out.
You need a day
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah. I think you're going to find out Disney. You also need that, brother. So, man, good luck. Have fun. Have fun.
Let's get some of these non-con games. But you mentioned Georgia Tech. Their beginning of their schedule is partly why I have them. I have them as my most difficult schedule in the league, but we will get to that. Non-con, you've got Clemson, Georgia. I think that's the highlight. That's the big game. It's on August 31st. It's in Atlanta. It's going to be huge. I also like NC State, Tennessee, and Charlotte. I think that's going to be really exciting and interesting. Could be a massive jumpstart for NC State in their season. Miami at Florida. Love that. Love that kind of rivalry renewed. North Carolina at Minnesota. I think that's just, Big Ten ACC vibes, but also UNC going up there. Should be a good crowd, all that stuff. And then I wrote down Wake Forest, Ole Miss because I was mainly asking why? Why on earth did Wake Forest schedule this game? But
They thought Sam Hartman would still be there.
After 12 years. Those are some that stand out to me, David. Which games stand out to you and that you're looking forward to the most?
Yeah, you mentioned a handful of them, and those I'll hit on those last two because I think they're interesting in terms of how the schedule sets up. So that Carolina trip to Minnesota, and that's a tricky game for Carolina. But as I looked at Carolina's schedule, I was like, aside from that, the early half of their schedule, really the first 2 months of their schedule are manageable. I mean, we don't know quite what we're going to expect. I mean, look, if Drake May was still there, I'd say that's a team that has a very good chance to start like 8-0. Yeah. I don't know quite what to expect from Carolina's offense at this point, and frankly from their defense either, with a new defensive coordinator. But if they can win that game at Minnesota, there is a real nice path there for them. Yeah. Wake is the opposite. Wake's early schedule is brutal. Yeah. And if they can survive that without just completely deflating, the back half of their schedule is much more manageable. But you have to wonder, coming off of a really rough year at Wake, if you start off like 1-4 or 2-4 or something like that, like, where's the energy around Wake? And Dave Clawson is a heck of a football coach and has done wonders there. But I mean, we said all those things about David Cutcliffe a few years back too. And when the bottom fell out, it was just hard at a place like Duke. And I think the same is true at a place like Wake to stem the tide. And so, you really got to hope that if you're Wake, like a game like that Ole Miss game is not something that really has a way of sinking your whole season. Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be tough. I mean, it really is. And you look at the players that they've lost for Wake Forest. I mean, it's going to be brutal. I mean, they got to figure it out quickly and make some stuff happen here. David, I know you're also really interested in the FSU Notre Dame game. I think those three that you kind of listed are the biggest, with Georgia, Clemson, NC State, Tennessee, and then FSU, Notre Dame.
See, I didn't know how we were counting Notre Dame. You know what I mean?
They ain't in. I promise you. I ain't never counting them. Hey, I'm like the playoff committee. I ain't counting them in the top four. I guarantee that.
Who's in? Not you.
Yeah, right. So why are those three games in particular, David, so important, for the league to go out and at least look good? I mean, I'm not saying you got to go 3-0, but you better look good.
Yeah. Well, one is Notre Dame has just made an embarrassment out of the ACC for way too long. And you can't have essentially your standard bearer losing to Notre Dame this year. I think that's a critical one for both Florida State and for the ACC. The Georgia-Clemson one, I don't know that it is the end of the world to lose to Georgia. Everybody does. But what it is an opportunity for the ACC to say, no. We know, as I just said, we're going to spend the back half of this year talking about strength of schedule. And here's our trump card. If we beat Georgia with one of our marquee teams to open the season, like, it's just so critical to how the rest of the conversation is going to go, not just for Clemson, but for everyone in the ACC. Right. And then really, I think NC State and Tennessee is sort of the JV version of that same thing, because Tennessee will come in as a pretty highly ranked team. And I think NC State is and look, I think Tennessee has a chance to be pretty good. I think NC State has a chance to be really good. Now, how we've been down this road before, and NC State has a way of making us look foolish when we say these things. But look, I think the Grayson McCall ad is a really good one. He does so much of what they want to do well. I think they've hit some home runs in the transfer portal. They've gotten more talented. They've managed to add experience. One of my big concerns was the ground game, which has done nothing for basically the better part of the last few years. And I talked to Dave Doran, and he said, look, we were very strategic about how we addressed that room in particular. So I think this is a chance to be a good season for NC State, but it also has a chance for them to shoot themselves in the foot real early on the season. The other game that you mentioned, Kelly, that I think is certainly worth pointing out too is the Florida-Miami game. And while I think winning that game is certainly great, what you really don't want to do if you're either of those teams is lose that game, because it is going to be a long season for either head coach, whichever one loses that football game.
Do you kind of feel we spoke to some Miami folks earlier in the month of February, and they were pretty adamant, like both teams are under a bit of a microscope, and if you lose that, all that pressure just swings, that maybe both teams are holding to the loser. Are you kind of in that camp too?
Yeah, and I mean, look, if you look at Florida's schedule, I know we're not talking SEC schedules here, but it is brutal. I mean, it is probably the hardest schedule in the country. And this is for a team that has missed a bowl game the last couple of years and has a coach on the hot seat. Like, you just can't afford to lose this game. And then if you're Miami, I don't think Mario Cristobal's on the hot seat no matter what happens. I think they have too much invested in him. And he has done a good job of bringing in talent. But I was talking to Andrea about this last week. The window is as open as it is ever going to be for Miami right now.
Right.
Because we don't know exactly what we're going to get out of Clemson. Florida State obviously is replacing a lot of big talent. This is year 3 for Mario. They might have the best quarterback in the league with Cam Ward, and the schedule actually sets up really nicely for Miami. This is the time it has to. It doesn't mean they can't do it later, but if they don't do it now, they are playing to an inside straight in the future, because this is the easiest it's going to get.
Yeah.
I agree completely. It's a great point. And I think Miami does have one of the more manageable schedules. Let's get to the hardest, okay? I'm going to throw out some of my hardest, and you tell me if you agree, disagree, David. I think we have a different one in terms of the most difficult. But my top 5, I have Clemson at 5. I think Clemson, for once, you could say, has a pretty darn difficult schedule. To have Georgia in there, you have App, by the way.
Yeah, which is not a pushover considering where it's located on the schedule, too.
You have App right after Georgia, bye week, NC State, Stanford, Florida State. So you have NC State and Florida State on there. Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pitt at the end, and Carolina. You draw NC State and Virginia Tech and Florida State, plus Georgia. Yeah. That's a tough, plus Louisville. We don't know what Louisville's going to look like. So I have Clemson at 5. And you opened my eyes to BC. Here's what happened for me with BC. I have BC at 4. I was looking at the logos on their schedule, and I was like, oh, okay, they have Missouri. And I completely missed, is that Michigan State on there? Like, that's so random. So I see Michigan State on there as well. That's 2 of their non-cons. They have Florida State right away. Of course, they get Florida State after Ireland, which is, I think, good for them. They draw Virginia Tech as well. And then I think a tough finish with Syracuse, SMU, UNC, Pitt. I think just adding those random non-cons plus Louisville as well, I bumped them onto my list. But I'm telling you, I didn't recognize the Michigan State logo. Number 3 for me is Virginia. Virginia's schedule, I don't like it for UVA. They have Maryland on there. They have Wake Forest early. They have Coastal. Is that at Coastal? I think that's at Coastal. Don't love that.
I thought we were doing away with these games. I thought Jim Phillips said,
what?
Like, don't we stop doing this to ourselves?
Well, the bad news is they're scheduled out till 2040, so we still got some on the docket.
Exactly. But the issue for me with Virginia, their October, they have Louisville, Clemson, Carolina. And then Virginia's finish at Pitt, at Notre Dame, SMU, at Virginia Tech. Good grief. That November is terrible. Then I have Wake at 2, and we just talked about Wake. They have Ole Miss at the beginning of the year, plus Virginia, open date, and Louisiana, which I don't think is any pushover, NC State, Clemson, and then Wake's finish, they go to Stanford. I think I added a little bit of difficulty if you have to go to Stanford or Cal. So you have that, and they go to UConn as well, open date, and then they finish Cal, at UNC, at Miami, Duke. But, and we may disagree here, David, my hardest schedule, as pretty much every year, is Georgia Tech. And I'll tell you why. They open with Florida State in Dublin. All right, good luck. They play right after, like Florida State does, but they don't play. I think Florida State plays a couple days later. Georgia Tech plays on that Saturday. Then Georgia Tech, after going to Ireland, does not have an open date until the very end of September. They have 5 straight games, including Ireland. And in those is at Syracuse and at Louisville. So that's brutal. Their November, they have Notre Dame and Virginia Tech and UNC in there. And then they finish with like a weird open date, Miami open date, which I almost think is a waste of an open date.
The Miami open date sandwich.
Yeah, what? Yeah. And then they finish the year NC State and Georgia. Mm-hmm. So I've got Clemson, BC, Virginia, Wake, Georgia Tech. Go, David.
Yes, to follow on our previous tease, Georgia Tech is the team that has 6 teams.
Okay, I figured.
In Mark Schlabach's way too early top 25. And that doesn't even include the road trip to Virginia Tech, which I think will be a top 25 team by the end of the year. Right. So it is. But to your point, Kelly, this actually might be an easier schedule than they had last year. It is. Look, this is a team that has lost several games to MAC opponents over the recent years, so it's not like an easier schedule necessarily changes their fortunes dramatically, but it has been brutal for years. And having annually Clemson and Georgia already is tough, and then you add Florida State into that mix, and then it's mind-boggling how brutal it is.
Right.
And I mean,
when they add Notre Dame this year, you throw that on there.
It is tough. So I mean, I don't really disagree. That is a brutal schedule. And I mean, it's kind of a miracle they got to 6 wins last year to make a bowl. I think it will probably be a similarly difficult challenge this year. Though I will say the weirdest thing about Georgia Tech is, at least under Brent Key, they have done much better against like good teams than bad teams.
That is true. That is true. That's good coaching right there, baby. That's good coaching.
That's right.
Get them fired up.
Yeah, so and again, looking at some of the numbers that I looked up about the way too early top 25. So the teams that had 4 were Clemson, Louisville, Wake Forest, and Stanford. And I agree with you. Wake Forest has a really tough start. Stanford, if we're going to talk about them as an ACC team, they're in that mix too.
Yeah, and I had them right on the edge of my list. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. They have a very weird schedule, and one of the weirdest parts is they go to Syracuse on September 20th, and then to Clemson on September 28th.
Might as well stay.
Well, we talked to Troy Taylor. I thought that they might. He said no, they will go back home to Palo Alto in between. Then, of course, they come back from those 2 trips to the East Coast back to back, and they play Virginia Tech, and then a trip to Notre Dame, and then home against a pretty good SMU team. It is Stanford. For a team that is really trying to do something after a few years out in the wilderness, they're in a bleak spot scheduling wise. So maybe they surprise a few people, but I don't know. That looks like a rough one to me. And look, I agree with you on Clemson too. It's a good point, but particularly that September is so problematic for them. And I don't, lose to Georgia again. As I said, I don't think it's the end of the world, but let's say you've got 2 losses by the end of September, or that first week in October. I mean, this is 4 years in a row of there not being a ton of playoff enthusiasm, of people feeling like you aren't the team that you're supposed to be, of lunatics calling into Dabo's radio show. Like, at some point, I think Dabo's made some nice moves this offseason. I think the team is better. I think if you asked me to basically flip the coin between FSU and Clemson right now, I kind of lean towards Clemson. But, those first 5 weeks are going to tell a huge story, and then it's going to be a long 2 months after that if it doesn't go well.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's any question about that. Let's jump into the Tigers a little bit here, and let's kind of start with non-scheduled talk. And with what you were kind of saying right there, just give me one thing. I don't need a long list or a couple of things, whatever. One thing that if Clemson fixes – in your mind, they're back to where they're supposed to be, or that dominant team that they were for nearly a decade.
I mean, it's hard to just say the quarterback because so many other factors help or hurt the quarterback. But it is kind of the quarterback. Like, I looked this up for TV the other day. From 2015 to 2020, when they made the playoff every year, their combined total QBR was the best in the ACC. From 2021 to last year, when they've missed the playoff every year, it's the worst in the ACC. 14 out of 14. That is crazy. And look, Cade last year had four or five games where he played pretty good. And then 4 or 5 games where he played pretty bad. And you've got to find – and look, again, I talked to a handful of folks, and Mac, you can probably speak pretty eloquently on this, but like the O-line scheme and what Garrett Riley really wanted to do, I don't think matched up well, like all of that. And so I think they're in a better place with that. If they're healthier and better at wide receiver, which I think is a big if, despite Dabo's hype, I think that all of these things help Cade Klubnik. But you look at like the slide against Duke, or the 2 terrible third down decisions that cost them games, particularly in overtime against Florida State. Yeah, I mean, you've got to look at those and say, like, that's not just like, well, you don't have the talent around you. That's just terrible decision-making in the moment, and that stuff needs to get much, much better.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think part of it, is we tend to forget that there is a growing up process. Like, we just think that everybody, coming in 5-star –
for most people, there are some
ready.
that there isn't, and Clemson's had a few of those, and that's why they're
spoiled.
And
they're spoiled by the fact that Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence were ludicrous. And, I talked to Graham Neff about this a few weeks ago, and he pointed this out, and I hadn't really considered it. But when you add in, like, the COVID year and all of that, like, Cade Klubnik was 19 last year. Jordan Travis was 23. And that's a big freaking difference.
It's huge.
And there's several guys that fit into that. Like, it's, Michael Penix and Bo Nix, those guys are in the Heisman conversation. Like, Jaden Daniels too. Like, those guys are grown men.
Right.
Cade Klubnik's still every bit of like a year out of high school.
Wasn't Penix older than Trevor Lawrence? I think I saw that stat. Or at least about the same age.
Possible.
Yeah.
Very possible.
People forget Penix and Bo Nix, those guys had been around the block. But I mean, I think you're right on that, David. And, we'll see. And the problem, I think, again, what makes Clemson's schedule so difficult is there's no easing into the year, And there's a little PTSD, if you will, from the last time Clemson opened with Georgia. And it almost just derailed your year. Like, I feel like DJU was never the same.
I don't think almost is even – I think it did.
Yeah.
I mean, it absolutely did. And that's what's fascinating, KG, to me is this is almost – that full circle opportunity of this is kind of what got you into this. Is it going to be what gets you out of it? Now that you have it, or you just, forever spiral.
And like you said,
I think that's a great point because look, Georgia's a really damn good football team. And again, if you asked me to make a pick on that game, I mean, it'd kind of be foolish not to pick Georgia at this point, but doesn't this just feel like a perfect Dabo, I told you so moment? Like, see, y'all have been doubting me since the last time we played them, and I told you this was going to happen. And, like, it just, I can see the narrative in my mind's eye.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, we bring up DJU. Let's talk about Florida State with that situation. David, I saw you had DJU on All ACC, so you've talked with him. Just from their schedule in general, I think it shapes up pretty nicely. I really like their open dates. I feel like they're going to have good spacing in their schedule here. They go to SMU, which I think will be good for the league. And my brother who lives in Dallas is already trying to get tickets for that game. So it's a good sign there. But when you chatted with DJU, tell me what you learned and what do you think of the DJU fit at Florida State?
Yeah, it's funny. So I remember last year at the ACC championship game, both head coaches who did a lot in the transfer portal and are probably 2 of the best at approaching the transfer portal in the country, were asked like what their approach is, what their blueprint is for the portal. And they gave 2 very different answers. Jeff Brom talked about his dad coaching back in the day and said his dad's secret to winning football games was just have the best players. And he's like, when I look at the portal, I just go and say, who are the best players and let me try to get them. And God bless him, it worked pretty damn well last year. Mike Norvell is certainly not ignoring talent, but he is so detailed in making sure that it's the right guys who fit his program, personality-wise, culture-wise, all of that stuff. I remember talking to Derek Ray, who's like his general manager type there, and he said he was telling me a story about there was a recruit that they had, a transfer recruit that came onto campus and didn't open up a car door for his mother getting out to go visit, and Norvell was like, "Yeah, I don't know if this is the guy that we need." Like that's how detailed. And all the little things that Norvell is looking for. And boy, oh boy, when you start thinking about it through that perspective, you understand why DJ was such a good fit there. Because for all of the criticisms of DJ, many of which are genuinely deserved, there is not a better high character guy to bring in than him. And then I talked to a few people who have been around Mike Norvell for a long time and know kind of what his offensive mindset is. And I said, look, to his credit, he really adjusted what he likes to do offensively or is most comfortable doing offensively to fit what Jordan Travis does, which is smart because Jordan Travis is a damn good football player who does a lot of things really well. But Jordan Travis wasn't the stretch the field guy. And Mike Norvell wants to be a stretch the field offense. He wants to go over the top. That's another thing that DJ does really, really well. So look, again, we can talk about this. We've all seen DJ for a long time now. He's, I don't think, ever going to become the quarterback that we thought maybe he would be in 2020. That's not necessarily a knock on him, but maybe a knock on our expectations. But I think he is a smart veteran guy that will really get the players around him to like him, that will be great in the locker room, and that can exploit the offensive firepower that they have in a good way. Right. And some of the limitations can be offset by having better talent, which, quite frankly, at Oregon State, he had a little bit better talent. At Clemson, his couple of years there, he really didn't have a whole lot to help offset the things that he doesn't do well. Right. So I think it can be a pretty good fit. Do I think he's Jordan Travis? No. It is a 180 from that. And to me, that's the biggest question is like, how does the whole thing evolve around DJU?
And I think that's a great point. It was probably a little silly for some of us, myself included, to sit here and say, oh, the fit, this and that, it doesn't make sense. Well, we were trying to put him in the box of Jordan Travis. And what your great point there is, Coach Norvell created that box. And guess what? He's going to create another box for DJ. I mean, it's just that's how good of a play caller he is. That's how great of an offensive mind he is. And I like that. I mean, I do think back to those Memphis days where they're slinging that thing. I mean, they're launching the ball downfield. They're taking shots. They didn't have this super crazy dual threat quarterback like they did there at Florida State. So that's a great point. And I am going to be fascinated just to see what that looks like. How does it work? The offensive line, I think, is going to be pretty good. And how can those complementary pieces, take another step now that the Keons, the Johnnies are gone? And who's next up there? Looking at their schedule, and we're going to get you out of here. I'm sorry. We're taking a lot of your time. We want to finish kind of with Virginia Tech. I'll let KG kind of kick that off. But looking at Florida State's middle schedule here, at SMU, Clemson, at Duke, at Miami, back-to-back, Carolina, at Notre Dame. That is a brutal little stretch right there. Just give me your thoughts on the Noles and how important that middle of the season is, where theoretically you should be, playing your best. Yeah.
Well, I think part of it, you mentioned the sort of late September stretch, Memphis, Cal, at SMU. That's three teams that you don't really know a whole lot. I mean, it's a unique, like all three of those are, I mean, Memphis isn't technically Power 5, but like, these are good football teams by and large, and you have to kind of make some adjustments. Like I'm not sold on SMU as a real threat in the ACC this year because I just don't think they're going to have the depth to hold up the whole season. But September they might be pretty good, and all of that comes before Clemson, which is of course the thing that is that green light at the end of the harbor that you're kind of thinking about all the time. And then I look like that. Duke.
Was that a great Gatsby reference?
That was a great Gatsby reference. I'm trying to up the literary quotient.
That was amazing. All right, proceed. Sorry.
You got that road trip to Duke coming right before a trip to Miami. Like that's a trap game if you've ever seen one. And then you get I think this is look, Florida State is talented enough to run that schedule. Like, it's not going to be easy, but they're talented enough to do it. Like, looking at the schedule, like Georgia Tech, BC, Memphis, Cal, SMU, Clemson, and at Notre Dame are really the only two, and maybe at Miami are the only three games where you say, like, they're not clearly going to be the better team on the field in that game. Doesn't mean they're going to win, but they're not clearly more talented. So they can absolutely run the schedule. But I think that the focus week in and week out that needs to be there to do it is going to come down so much to how this coaching staff approaches this season. And we've seen Mike Norvell can be a real miracle worker on that front. So look, I think there's just so many moving pieces with Florida State though too. And it's just so hard to know exactly where how all of these fit, because it's going to look so much different than it did last year.
And I think a lot of that focus came from Jordan Travis's leadership as well. So seeing how they replace that, but they have a bye week in every month of the season, which I think is pretty good for Florida State. Let's finish with the Hokies, who a lot of people are high on. We know Hokie fans are high on Virginia Tech and excited. I was just in Blacksburg, by the way, for College Game Day, and it was electric. So
KG, when are you not in Blacksburg? When are you not in Blacksburg?
I should literally get an apartment. Okay.
Can I ask you a very insidery question that
Sure.
is going to be the point in this show that everyone listening or watching tunes out? Have you ever, for work, gone in and actually accounted your hours to the specific states in which you were working, like we're supposed to? Because I have never
Hey,
done that. Okay.
Hey, don't bring that up.
I always do it. I always do it.
We're done.
All right.
We're done.
David,
you just ruined all of us.
we're going to have to cut that out.
Edit this part out. Yeah.
The only people who will get that are people who work for ESPN. Okay. So Virginia Tech, I have them actually on my list. Not the easiest, but I think one of the easier, more manageable schedules. I think Syracuse's schedule is the easiest. North Carolina is probably right there. And I think SMU's is definitely manageable. But let's look at Virginia Tech. They open at Vanderbilt, which is interesting. And
Powerhouse.
Their first 4 games are
SEC power.
I mean, look, SEC, ACC, get that dub.
Yep.
Vanderbilt, Marshall, Old Dominion, at Old Dominion again. Why?
Well,
Rutgers.
nothing bad has ever happened there for Virginia.
I know.
Bring your own locks.
Rutgers,
Bring your
who
own
they
locks.
lost to last year, and then you have Miami on a Friday night, I believe it is, and then you go to Stanford. So, look, you're probably favored in most of those games. It's just kind of weird. You have 4 road games before your bye week on October 12th, and then you only have 2 road games left. It gets a bit, you have Clemson on there, but I think you have a ton of winnable games afterwards. So with all the hype for Virginia Tech, they really have to weather the beginning of that schedule.
If Virginia Tech just wins the games in which they theoretically on paper are the better team, I think they're 10-2 this year. That's just winning the games that you probably should be favored in. And
what are the losses? Miami and Clemson?
Short week at Miami and then versus Clemson. Yeah, I mean, those are going to be, I think, 2 really tough games.
Come on, man. I love that.
And look, so I talked to
Are they in the playoff? Are they 10-2 in the 12th seed?
Part of this is my frustration with the playoff being at 12 is you should have to beat either Miami or Clemson to be in that conversation.
Right,
it's like how Penn State would have been in last year without beating either Michigan or Ohio State. You didn't play anybody else that was going to beat you.
Yeah.
So, so I will say this of Virginia Tech. It's a quirky schedule, and so I think, as you point out, Kelly, that leaves things open to chance. And I talked to Brent Pry at the end of last year, right before the bowl game, and he was saying, I look back and I'm so frustrated by September and early October because we're such a better team now. And if we had the team that we have now at the beginning of the season, where would we be? Well, this is their chance to prove that, because it's basically a very similar schedule. I mean, you can't lose Old Dominion and Rutgers type of games if you want to be taken seriously as a program. And the narrative last year, because of the way the season unfolded, was that that was a different team and now they're much better. Well, now you got to go rubber meets the road, prove it. So look, I tend to think this is a pretty good team. They have brought back so many guys. I think Brent Pry is a great fit there as a head coach, just in setting the personality and the approach to the program wants to have. But again, you got to go do it. We've seen Virginia Tech lose way too many of these games, including losing and getting your locker room robbed in Norfolk a couple of years ago. So until you show me a trip to Norfolk that doesn't end in epic disaster, I'm not writing off anything.
That's right. I'm with you. I'm also with you on 10-2, baby. Come on. The Hokies are kind of my dark horse here, and I think it could be really fun. What also was really fun, David, was talking to you, man. Thank you for your time. This was awesome. Really grateful for you, brother. Thanks for joining us.
We should do this more often. It was a pleasure.
All right, guys, that wraps it up. Man, I cannot wait for this season. Cannot wait for my first road trip out to California to cover Stanford, to cover Cal. I wonder when that's going to come. If you want to drop some predictions of your own, what week will the ACC huddle go out to California, whether that be Stanford, whether that be Cal? Maybe we do both. Who knows? In one day. That would be a fun trip. And you can't cheat and say the summer tour or the camp tour. Of course, we're going for that during the season. I want to know what you think. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, cannot do this without your support. Appreciate your viewership, your listenership, everything you do to help KG and I out here. But that's it from us. We need your help continuously, as I just mentioned. Go over to YouTube, subscribe, mash that button, jump in the comments, as I alluded to earlier. And, of course, the OGs over on Apple Podcasts. Rate, review, subscribe there as well. We would greatly appreciate that. But until next time, we'll see y'all.